I never knew a single sentence could end 30 years of sacrifice. But there it was, glowing on my phone screen, cold and final. You won't be joining us on the family trip. Kim wants it to be just the nuclear family this year. That was it. No greeting. No apology. Just a digital dismissal like I was a service that had run its course. At first I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not hurt. Just a kind of stillness. Like the world had pressed pause. I stood there barefoot in my kitchen holding the phone like it might suddenly change its mind and take the words back. But it didn't. The message just sat there, solid and undeniable, glowing with all the warmth of a rejection letter. My thumb hovered over the screen, unsure of what to say. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. I typed a single word. Okay, and hit send. I don't know why. Maybe because anything more would have opened a dam I wasn't ready to deal with yet. Maybe because part of me still wanted to believe it wasn't as cruel as it felt. But it was. That one word. Okay, carried 30 years of motherhood. Sleepless nights, scraped knees, broken hearts soothed, birthdays remembered, bills paid when they couldn't make rent, babysitting last minute when Kim's parents were too busy. And now I wasn't family enough to go on the trip I paid for. I stared at the phone. My reflection looked back at me in the dark screen. A woman too used to swallowing her hurt. Too used to making excuses for others. Too afraid of seeming dramatic. Too trained in forgiveness. I'd paid for the cruise months ago. I remember the call with Ben, my son. He had sounded excited. You always wanted to see the Mediterranean, right, Mom? Let's all go. It'll be our big family thing. Kim says it's the perfect time for the kids. I remember smiling at the idea. I'd been collecting cruise brochures for years, always talking myself out of it. Too expensive. Too indulgent. And then suddenly there was a reason. I dipped into savings without hesitation. Covered their flights. Paid for the larger suite with adjoining rooms so the grandkids would have space. Even added the excursion package, because Ben mentioned Kim loved local wine tastings. I wanted it to be special. For them. For us. I told myself it was a celebration of love and time and family. No. Kim wants it to be just the nuclear family. Nuclear. What an apt word. The blast radius of that sentence flattened something inside me. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same one Ben used to do his homework on, back when he still needed me for math problems and warm meals. I looked around the room. Everything here had a story, a purpose, a memory wrapped around it like ivy on old brick. The quilted oven mitt I stitched by hand. The framed photo of the kids in front of the tree last Christmas, taken right after I bought all the gifts they couldn't afford. I always told myself that being needed was enough. That giving was love. That generosity was proof of connection. But suddenly all those acts of love just felt like receipts. And none of them were redeemable now. The kettle whistled on the stove, a sharp, sudden sound that made me flinch. I moved on instinct, turning it off, pouring water into a mug, dropping in a tea bag. But I didn't taste a thing. I just sat there, cupping the heat, trying to figure out how I'd gone from beloved mother to inconvenient tag-along. I didn't want to hate Kim. That's what made it harder. I tried over the years to find her softer side. I wanted to believe she simply had a different way of loving, a different language. But even now, after this, my mind tried to protect her image. Maybe she just wanted private time with her kids. Maybe she's feeling overwhelmed. Maybe she doesn't know how much this would hurt me. But then again, how could she not? They all knew this cruise was my dream. I'd said it aloud more than once, even when no one asked. And still they chose this. To plan a trip with my money, and then uninvite me. I opened the message again. Read it again. Just to be sure it really said what I thought it said. It did. That sentence was a door closing. Not gently, not with regret, but with certainty. I could almost hear the click of the latch. The house felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in after a funeral. Not a death of a person, but the death of an illusion. The illusion that love guarantees respect. That loyalty protects you. That if you give enough, they'll never push you out. I looked at the calendar pinned to the fridge. Circled in blue ink. Family Cruise, June 17th. A small heart doodled beside it. That was me. Always the optimist. The one who believed we were closer than we were. My mind wandered back to the day I booked it. I'd been on hold with the travel agent for an hour, adjusting dates to fit around Kim's work schedule. I remember asking, will they be happy with the room choice? As if their joy was the standard by which everything should be measured. I wondered how long they had known I wasn't coming. Did they discuss it weeks ago? Did Kim roll her eyes and say, "She'll understand"? Did Ben hesitate? Did he defend me? Or was this always the plan? That thought, that he might have agreed easily, cut deeper than I expected. Not because it was surprising, but because deep down I think I always knew he was drifting. That I was the safety net, not the priority. And nets don't get invited on cruises. They're just there to catch the fall. I stood up and poured out the tea. The warmth had faded. It was bitter and cold like everything else that morning. I rinsed the mug and set it back on the rack, my motions mechanical, too practiced to feel like care. I picked up the phone again. Thought about texting back. "I understand. Thanks for letting me know. I hope you all have a great time." But I couldn't bring myself to type any of it. Not this time. Not after everything. Instead, I opened the banking app. Not to do anything, not yet. Just to look. To remind myself whose name was attached to every payment. Every flight, every booking, every dollar poured into this trip like cement into a foundation that was never mine. It was mine. The whole damn thing. Paid in full. By me. And now I wasn't welcome. I turned off the phone, set it face down on the counter, and let the silence swell again. But this time it wasn't empty. It was heavy. Charged. Like the moments before a storm, when the sky turns an unfamiliar shade of gray and you can feel the electricity in your skin. Something inside me shifted that morning. Not loudly. Not all at once. But in a quiet, decisive way. A reordering. A realignment. I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that in other years, in other rooms, over other hurts. This wasn't sadness. It was something sharper. More awake. I walked to the front window, looked out at the street, watched a couple walking their dog, carefree and chatting. The world hadn't ended. But mine had changed. And no one else would even know. Except me. I breathed in slowly, exhaled through my nose, and whispered to no one in particular, "Okay." But this time that word didn't mean surrender. It meant beginning. They say betrayal never arrives suddenly. It drips in slowly like water wearing down stone. And now looking back I can trace every drop. Every moment when I disappeared just a little more. Not all at once. Just gradually. Quietly. When Ben was born I held him so tightly I thought I might fuse into him. He was everything. My late husband Mark had died in a car accident before Ben's first birthday. One minute we were planning our future. The next I was planning a funeral and trying to hold a baby without falling apart. I didn't crumble. Not on the outside. I got a part-time job at the pharmacy and then a full-time job as soon as Ben started preschool. I paid bills, skipped vacations, sold the car for something smaller. Everything became about keeping things stable for him. He never asked to be born into loss. I wasn't going to let him feel it more than he had to. The years rolled on like that. I was the mom who made cupcakes for the bake sale even when I worked a double shift. I stayed up with him when he had nightmares, coached him through school plays and gave him every ounce of love I could spare. And some I couldn't. College came and with it came tuition bills that took my breath away. I emptied the small inheritance my mother had left me. I never told him. I just smiled when he graduated. I wanted him to feel free. Like he had a wide sky in front of him, not a mother dimmed by stress. Then he met Kim. She was charming at first, polished in a way I never quite was. She had opinions about everything. The wedding, the invitations, the guest list. I smiled and said, "Whatever makes you two happy," because that's what I thought good mothers did. Fade into the background so their children can shine. At their wedding I remember standing behind the photographer, off to the side while he captured that perfect shot of them beneath the archway. My dress was navy blue, plain. Her mother wore sequins and gave a toast. I wasn't asked to speak. I told myself it didn't matter. That it was their day, not mine. Later, when they bought their first house, I gave them $15,000 from my retirement fund. As a gift. That's how Kim phrased it when she texted me to say thanks. "We'll use this to fix up the bathroom." So generous of you. No phone call. No invitation to see the place. I asked once if I could stop by and she replied, "It's kind of chaotic right now. Maybe in a few weeks." Weeks became months. I sent birthday gifts for the kids. Never once got a thank you card. I told myself they were busy. That this is how families grow and evolve. That love doesn't always look like it used to. When I'd call Ben, sometimes he'd answer with, "Hey, we're just sitting down to dinner. Can I call you back?" And then he wouldn't. When I'd text, it was usually Kim replying. Polite, brisk, rarely warm. Over time, she became the gatekeeper of their lives, and I didn't want to cause tension. So I stayed quiet. Made myself smaller. More convenient. And I told myself they loved me. Last year, I offered to take the grandkids for a weekend. Kim replied, "They've got soccer and a birthday party, but thanks for the offer." No counter-suggestion. No attempt to make it work. Just decline and move on. I started to feel like a relic. Something gently placed on a shelf and dusted off at Christmas. But I clung to the memories. Ben running down the hallway with his blanket cape. The way he used to call me his favorite person. The nights I sang him back to sleep when he had the flu. I held on to those pieces because they were the only proof I had that I'd once mattered more than convenience. When the idea of the family vacation came up, it wasn't even theirs. It was mine. I was the one who said, "Wouldn't it be beautiful to all travel together while the kids are still young enough to want to?" I said it half joking over dinner at my place. Ben nodded. Kim smiled tightly. It would be nice, but probably too expensive right now. So I made it possible. I sat down with brochures. Talked to agents. Compared room sizes, deck levels, travel dates, and childcare options. I wanted to get it just right. I knew their budget was tight. Ben had mentioned the roof needed replacing. So I offered to pay. Not just for me but for all of us. "It's your retirement money," Kim said. "Are you sure?" I said I was. And I meant it. I didn't want jewelry or parties or recognition. I just wanted memories. Together. Sunsets over the Mediterranean. Laughter at dinner. Grandkids running down cruise ship hallways. I imagined us playing board games, telling stories, me teaching the girls how to fold napkins into swans. A picture-perfect moment. My gift to the family. My reward for the invisible years. And I planned every inch. I picked a cruise with stops in Spain, Italy, and Greece. Made sure the cabins had balconies. Paid extra for the dining package Kim liked. Reserved excursions I thought the kids would enjoy. Made careful notes in a spiral notebook with tabs and post. I kept it next to my bed like a prayer book. Because I thought, maybe this would bring us closer. Maybe this would make me feel included again. Needed. But it didn't. I never saw it coming. That message, "You won't be joining us," wasn't just a rejection. It was a reversal of everything I believed about love and loyalty. I was no longer part of the we. I was the outsider who funded the inside. That's what hurt the most. Not just the exclusion but how long I'd been easing myself out of my own life, making room for others to take the space I used to fill. I'd been slowly stepping back, thinking it was graceful. Noble. Right. All the while, they let me disappear without so much as a backward glance. I think about that sometimes. If they even noticed. If Ben ever missed our old Sunday dinners, or if Kim ever wondered about the woman whose money made their life easier. Or maybe I was just a line item in their mental budget. Mom will cover it. But I didn't see myself that way. I saw myself as family. Now I see the truth. I was convenient, generous, predictable, and ultimately optional. And yet I still hesitate to blame them. That's the dangerous part of love. How it makes excuses long after respect has left the room. How it disguises erasure as maturity and silence as strength. But deep down I think I always knew. I just didn't want to face it. Not when I gave them that down payment. Not when I bought Kim that bracelet she said she loved but never wore. Not when I drove 2 hours to drop off cupcakes for a school event I wasn't invited to attend. I thought I was investing in connection. But I was just funding my own invisibility. And that realization, that slow, cold truth, is what wrapped itself around my heart the moment I read that message. Not just the pain of being uninvited, but the ache of realizing I'd been disappearing for years, and no one tried to stop it. Strange, the exact moment a heart hardens, not out of hatred but understanding. For me, it wasn't even the message that did it. It was the stillness that followed. The clarity. I remember sitting at the dining table, phone still in my hand, and rereading Ben's text like it might morph into something softer if I stared long enough. As if context or affection might suddenly drip between the lines. But no. It stayed exactly as it was. "You won't be joining us. Kim prefers to keep it just the nuclear family this year." This year. As if I'd somehow misunderstood my position in this family all along. As if this removal was gentle. Something I'd nod politely at and accept. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there feeling a strange hollowness in my spine. The kind you get when a room is too quiet after a slammed door. And I thought, so this is what it feels like to be used up. To be milked for love, for money, for time, and then politely excused when you've outlived your usefulness. I made their life easier. That was my role. Babysitting when Kim had urgent meetings. Driving across town with last-minute cupcakes because Ben forgot the school treats. Paying the credit card when their boiler broke. Saying nothing when they asked for a little help but never paid it back. And I always showed up. Even when I wasn't asked. Especially then. Because somewhere along the way I learned to believe that love was proven in quiet service. That to be needed was the closest I'd get to being cherished. But now, sitting alone at the same dining table where I once laid out cruise brochures with excitement, something inside me finally shifted. It didn't shatter. It straightened. My hands were trembling, not from sadness but adrenaline. Cold realization. A kind of awakening I didn't know I was still capable of at this age. So I opened my laptop. It was instinct more than intention. I logged into the cruise portal and pulled up the itinerary. There it was, paid in full. My name on the booking. 5 passengers. 2 cabins. Premium meal plans. Childcare add-ons. Shore excursions. Everything was arranged under my email. My payment method. I scrolled further. Final balance. $14,872.43. Status paid. The number made me blink. I remembered piecing that together over months. Splitting it across 2 credit cards, cashing out a low-yield savings account. I didn't hesitate when I did it. I believed in the joy it would bring. No. I was erased. No phone call. No explanation. Just a message dismissing me like an administrative oversight. As if I'd mistakenly thought I belonged. I stared at the screen. Then back at the message. Then back at the screen. That's when the words came out of my mouth, low and steady. You used me. But you forgot I know where the money lives. I didn't shout it. I didn't rehearse it. This came. Like a truth finally granted permission to rise after being drowned for too long. And I realized then, I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even heartbroken. I was awake. I'd spent decades bending to fit into their lives. Trimming myself down so I wouldn't be too much. Offering help before they asked. Accepting scraps of affection in return. Every time Kim redirected a conversation. Every time Ben didn't call back. Every time my birthday passed with a sorry just got swamped text. I filed it away under forgivable. But now I saw the pattern and I saw it clearly. They didn't think of me as a mother. Not anymore. I was an asset. A financial convenience. A name on the card. And when the service was no longer required, I was removed. Like canceling a subscription. It was the stillness in that moment that made it powerful. I wasn't pacing or weeping. I was composed. Dangerous in a way I hadn't been in years. Because now I could see the truth and, more importantly, I was ready to act on it. I clicked over to my banking dashboard. I knew the cruise company's refund policy like the back of my hand. I'd read it 10 times when planning the trip. Cancellations within 30 days forfeited a portion. But outside of that, full refund minus a small fee. We were at 37 days out. Plenty of time. I hovered my mouse over the transaction. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, but it wasn't fear. It was certainty. The kind that comes from finally standing in your own life after years of kneeling in someone else's. I didn't click anything yet. I just let the knowledge settle in my bones. You are not powerless, it whispered. I thought back to every moment I bit my tongue for peace. Every time I smiled through disappointment. Every time I gave without being asked. Every time I left their house with dishes in my trunk and not even a thank you text. Every time I told myself it's just how they are. No more. I had paid for the dream. Every dollar of it. The view from the balcony suite. The snorkeling excursion in Santorini. The gelato walking tour for the kids. Every joy they were about to experience came from my invisible labor. And they thought they could exclude me? That I would just swallow it? Absorb the pain like I always had? No. Because what they forgot, what they never truly knew, was that I kept records. Not just financial ones. Emotional ones. Every time I was quietly dismissed. Every smile I faked. Every penny I gave without strings. And now, I was done keeping the peace that came at the cost of my dignity. I could feel the weight of all those invisible years pressing down on me. But for the first time I didn't let them crush me. I used them as fuel. I stared at that refund button. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. Because when someone shows you what you mean to them, believe them. And when they treat you like a line item in their life, you're allowed to subtract yourself. Even if they don't like the math. I didn't act out of rage. There was no drama, no screaming. Only a still, precise knowing that began to replace the years I'd spent second-guessing myself. The next morning I woke up before the sun. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to dread when I hoped someone would call or visit or remember me. But this morning it felt different. The quiet felt earned. Like space had been made for something new. I brewed my coffee and sat with it, letting the bitterness linger longer than usual. I watched the sky shift from dark navy to soft pink, and only then did I open my laptop again. Not out of panic. Out of intention. First the cruise line. I found the customer support number and dialed it slowly, letting each digit feel deliberate. When the woman answered, cheerful and scripted, I simply said, "I need to cancel my reservation. The one under Diane Foster." She verified my information, went through her formalities, and asked if there was a reason for the cancellation. "No," I said gently. "Just a change of plans." Pause. Then, "Would you like the refund to go back to the original payment method?" "Yes. Please. Every cent." Confirm. Done. $14,000. Locked away from people who had forgotten how to say thank you. Next I opened my travel folder. The one where I kept the hotel confirmations, airfare, dining reservations. I called each number on the page like a conductor guiding a quiet orchestra of consequence. The resort in Barcelona? Cancelled. The prepaid airport transfer? Cancelled. The airfare? Flagged for dispute. I told the airline there had been an error in who would be traveling. It was true in a poetic sort of way. Lastly, I called my credit card company. I spoke to someone in fraud protection. Calmly, respectfully. I told them there might be unauthorized charges pending from family members who had once had access. I asked them to place a freeze. They offered to close the card entirely and issue me a new one. "Yes," I said. "That would be perfect." And just like that, I reclaimed the key to the vault they had so carelessly taken for granted. I didn't send a warning. I didn't offer an explanation. I let silence do what my words never could. Speak the truth they refused to hear. I imagined them weeks from now, suitcases packed, sunscreen in hand, smiling kids in tow, walking up to the cruise terminal only to be told their booking was invalid. No record. No rooms. No trip. I didn't smile at the thought. Not exactly. But I won't lie and say it didn't settle into me like a small, quiet justice. By noon I was in my car driving downtown. The day was bright and full of movement, but I felt cocooned in my own focus. I wasn't a woman scorned. I was a woman correcting the ledger. I parked across from the old brick office where I'd first sat with Richard, my late husband, over 20 years ago to draft our wills. He'd passed long before we ever updated them. And I had let things drift as I often did, assuming there was time. There's always time until there isn't. But today I was done postponing clarity. The receptionist greeted me with polite surprise. I told her I needed to speak to Mr. Dalton. She offered to schedule a future appointment. I told her I'd wait. And I did, right there in that sterile lobby with its fake fern and outdated magazines, until they let me in. Dalton was older than I remembered but sharp as ever. He rose when I entered, extended a hand, and offered the kind of warm but professional smile reserved for old clients with heavy folders. "What can I help you with, Diane?" I sat down across from him and opened my file. Bank statements. Will drafts. Password changes. A manila envelope with power of attorney paperwork I never filed. I laid it all down like puzzle pieces. I want to update everything. Effective immediately. He raised an eyebrow. Everything. Yes. He leaned back, studying me. He didn't ask why. But I told him anyway. I told him about the message. About the cruise. About the silence that came after 30 years of sacrifice. I told him how it broke something open in me, not in anger but understanding. That I'd been writing myself out of my own life for too long. He listened carefully, nodding now and then but saying nothing until I finished. When I did, he closed the file, folded his hands and said something that surprised me, not because it was harsh but because it was true. "It's time they learned you weren't just the wallet." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. I hadn't even used those words. But he saw it. The reduction. The transaction that had replaced the relationship. And for the first time I didn't feel ashamed of how much I had given. I felt resolved. We got to work. He struck Ben and Kim from the will. We replaced them with a charity that supported single mothers returning to school. We set up a small trust in my name, for me should I ever need long-term care. Not for guilt-driven children to manage later, but for myself now while I was still clear-eyed. We revoked the power of attorney I had given Ben when he was 25, something I did then as a gesture of trust, never imagining I'd regret it. Dalton didn't press me. He just nodded, typed and printed page after page. When he handed me the pen to sign, my hand didn't shake. I left his office with a folder that felt heavier than it was. But it didn't feel burdensome. It felt earned. Back in the car, I sat with it in my lap and stared out the windshield for a long while. It's strange how quickly the world looks different when you decide you deserve more than crumbs. The thing is, I never expected them to be perfect. I knew life got busy. I knew raising children was hard. I didn't need gifts or grand gestures. I just wanted to matter. Not as a babysitter. Not as a backup wallet. Not as someone they could summon when convenient and dismiss when inconvenient. I wanted to be seen. And maybe, just maybe, losing their illusion of me was the first time I finally saw myself. That night, I lit one of the lavender candles I'd bought for the cruise stateroom. I poured a glass of wine. I didn't text anyone. I didn't refresh my inbox waiting for a call that wouldn't come. I just sat with myself. Whole. Steady. Untethered from the false obligation to make things okay for people who never asked if I was okay. There would be consequences, I knew. Questions. Maybe anger. But for once, I wouldn't be the one managing everyone's emotions. Let them feel confused. Let them stew. Because I had nothing to explain. They fired the first shot. I just quietly took back the ship. They left on a Thursday. Or at least they tried to. I didn't check. I didn't ask. But I knew their flight time by heart, because I had booked it. Seat assignments, luggage upgrades, kids' meals. Those details had lived in my calendar like sacred marks for weeks. But that Thursday I didn't look. Instead I walked to the park near my house. The one with the old oaks and a fountain that had probably needed repairs for years. I brought a small book with me, not to read, just to hold. Some things you carry just to feel the weight of them, like proof that you're allowed to take up space. The sky was a flat gray, the kind that keeps people indoors. But I liked it. It made the world feel quiet in the same way my heart had started to feel. Clean, still, undecorated. I sat on a bench and watched a little boy chase pigeons while his grandmother tried to keep him within reach. I wondered if she felt lucky. Or exhausted. Or maybe both. My phone didn't buzz. No texts. No passive-aggressive check-ins. Just silence. And I let it stretch. That weekend I rediscovered what it felt like to be unneeded. I visited a local cafe I hadn't been to in over a year. The one I used to take Ben to when he was a teenager and wanted pancakes at odd hours. I took my time with my coffee. I asked the waitress about her earrings. I tipped generously, not out of guilt or habit but because I wanted to. I called Martha, my old friend from work. We hadn't spoken in months, not because we'd fallen out, but because I'd convinced myself I was too busy. What I really meant was, too distracted by people who never made time for me. We talked for over an hour. Laughed harder than I thought I still could. And still, no word from them. I imagined them arriving at the airport, the kids tugging on backpacks, Kim triple-checking documents, Ben trying to keep things light. I imagined the moment they reached the check-in counter and heard the words they didn't expect. There's no reservation under your name. I imagined the confusion turning to disbelief. Then panic. Then the questions, the same ones I'd asked myself silently for years. How could this happen? What changed? Why would she do that? And I didn't feel vindictive. His level. Like gravity had finally evened out. Sunday evening came like a soft knock. I was folding laundry. Nothing glamorous, nothing cinematic. Just pairing socks and humming to myself when my phone finally rang. Ben. I stared at the name for a moment, unsure if I even wanted to answer. But something in me said it was time. I picked up. Mom. His voice was tight, breathless. I could hear background noise, what sounded like a rental car or maybe an airport hallway. I didn't speak first. I let the silence sit between us like a gate. Hey, something weird happened with the cruise line. We got to the terminal and they said our reservation didn't exist. They wouldn't let us board. And then the hotel said the room wasn't paid for either. We're trying to figure it out, but... He trailed off, then rushed. Do you mind checking your card? Maybe something happened. I listened. I didn't rush to fill the space. That was new for me, resisting the urge to rescue him from his own discomfort. He waited. I took a breath, slow and steady. No, I said. Pause. Confusion hung in the air like fog. No, he repeated. You'll need to figure this one out yourselves. Another pause. And then, before he could sputter or explain or backpedal or plead, I ended the call. And for the first time they were the ones left hanging. I stared at the phone in my hand, half expecting it to ring again. It didn't. And I didn't want it to. There was no satisfaction in it, no fist pump, no internal applause. Just a quiet steadiness. I had used one word. Then another. And that was all I needed. Not to explain. Not to justify. Just to hold my own line. It was strange. I'd spent so many years thinking my power came from being needed. From saying yes, from showing up, from giving what I could, even when no one asked. Especially when no one asked. But now I understood something I never had before. Sometimes power lives in refusal. In what you don't give. In the silence you allow to grow where old patterns used to live. That evening I made myself dinner. Real dinner. Not toast. Not something left over. I set the table with a cloth napkin and lit a small candle, not to pretend I had company, but to honor the company I now kept with myself. I thought about Ben's voice. How strained it sounded. How small. Not cruel, just unsure, like someone who had never imagined the foundation under his feet could move. But it had. And now he would have to learn how to balance differently. Maybe he'd call again. Maybe not. Maybe Kim would step in next time, voice sharp and full of explanations, trying to rewrite the facts. Maybe the kids would ask where Grandma went and she'd say something slippery and rehearsed. That was no longer my concern. I'd spent a lifetime managing everyone else's discomfort, cushioning their landings, smoothing their stories. Not anymore. Now I let the silence speak louder than my sacrifices ever did. And for once they'd have to sit in the space I left behind. I didn't write the letter to be cruel. I wrote it because the silence had become too loud to live inside anymore. It was a Sunday night, 3 days after I'd hung up on Ben. I knew they were still away, stranded in a city I had once imagined bringing us closer together. I imagined them in some generic hotel eating takeout from a plastic tray, trying to make the best of something that was never meant to break them, but wake them. I sat at my desk with a mug of tea and no plan. I didn't draft and redraft. I didn't even know what I'd say. But when I opened a blank email, the words came fast. Not with heat but with weight. Years of unspoken truths, rising like breath after almost drowning. I wrote, Ben, I imagine you're confused. Maybe angry. Maybe even embarrassed. That's okay. You are entitled to your feelings. Finally. But I need you to understand something, and I won't wait for your permission to say it. The cruise is cancelled. So is the hotel, the flights, the transportation I arranged. The money I gave, the money I always gave, has been pulled back. Frozen, not out of spite but because something inside me thawed. You're not the first man to mistake a mother's silence for bottomless patience. You're not the first child to grow into comfort and forget the hands that built that comfort from scratch. But you are my only son. And maybe that's why this hurts in a way I don't have words for. Still, I'm going to try. Do you remember how we used to plan road trips when you were a boy? You'd pick the snacks, I'd pack the car, and we'd laugh about the weird places we could stop. Do you remember how you used to fall asleep in the back seat, trusting I'd get us there safely? I carried that same energy into your adulthood. You wanted college. I made it happen. You got married. I helped buy your first home. You had kids. I babysat. I grocery shopped. I paid for birthdays. I sent money when the car broke down, when the fridge went out, when the holidays came and your budget fell short. I never kept score. But that doesn't mean I didn't feel the weight of it. And it's not the money I'm writing about. It never was. It's what the money became a stand-in for. Love. Relevance. It was the way Kim started saying things like, let's keep this one small, or, it's just for immediate family. As if I were a guest. As if my presence required justification. It was the way your calls became text. Then brief texts. Then nothing. It was hearing updates about my grandchildren through Christmas cards or social media, while I sat at home wondering what I'd done wrong. I told myself I was imagining it. That Kim was just busy. that you were just tired. That modern families work differently now. But there's a difference between distance and dismissal. And you crossed that line the day you sent me that message. You won't be joining us. 7 words. 7 knives. I stared at that message for 10 full minutes before I replied. I typed, okay, not because I was okay but because I knew no amount of begging would make me welcome again. What you didn't realize was this. I paid for that trip, not just in money but in dreams. I wanted one last vacation with my family before my knees gave out, before the grandkids stopped wanting to share rooms and run-down hotel hallways. I picked every detail with care, hoping it would patch something between us. Instead, it tore open what I had refused to look at for years. I have spent 3 decades bending myself into shapes to make sure everyone around me felt loved, supported, and stable. What I hadn't realized until your text was that in doing so I'd made myself disappear. Well, I'm done disappearing. This isn't a tantrum. This isn't emotional manipulation. This is the quiet reclaiming of a voice I buried under duty. You don't get to silence me and still spend me. You don't get to call me mom when it's convenient and extra when it's not. You don't get to remove me from the story and expect me to keep financing the fantasy. I don't expect an apology. I don't even expect understanding. But I expect you to know that from this moment forward things have changed. I am not your emergency fund. I am not your invisible cheerleader. I am not the woman who waits quietly while you build a family that pretends I never mattered. I'm your mother. And whether you can say it or not, you are who you are because I showed up, again and again when no one else did. Maybe you'll read this and roll your eyes. Maybe Kim will call it dramatic. Maybe you'll forward it to a friend and say, "Can you believe she did this?" That's fine. You're allowed your story. But I get mine too. And this is the part where mine finally starts telling the truth. The trip may be cancelled. But so is my silence. Take care, Mom. I stared at the words for a long time before hitting send. Not because I doubted them but because I knew what they cost. Every sentence was a small act of self-respect. Every paragraph, a page torn from the script I had followed for too long. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I felt still. Not vindicated. Not triumphant. Just clear. It wasn't about whether they'd respond. It was about me responding, to my own pain, to my own patterns, to the woman I had slowly abandoned in the name of staying needed. The message wasn't designed to punish. It was designed to inform. This is who I am now. Someone who no longer negotiates her dignity in exchange for proximity. Someone who can say no and still sleep at night. Someone who sees her worth even if no one else in the room claps for it. And as I closed the laptop, the email sent and final, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. A deep, resonant peace that no cruise or Christmas photo could ever buy. They could keep their curated memories. I had finally reclaimed mine. 3 months passed. The leaves turned and fell. The ache in my chest softened into something less sharp, something almost sacred. I didn't speak to Ben after the letter. He didn't reply. Not with words, anyway. But I saw a charge reversed here, a delivery refund there. Maybe that was his version of acknowledgement. Or avoidance. It didn't matter much anymore. Not the way it used to. Because today I was packing again. But this time not for them. The suitcase lay open on my bed, quiet and ready. No itinerary printed from someone else's request. No souvenir lists. No matching family t-shirts folded in hopeful stacks. Just what I needed and nothing I didn't. A couple of sundresses. A bottle of lavender spray. A hardbound journal with thick blank pages waiting to hold something real. And at the bottom, tucked gently between layers of soft clothes, my husband's old book of poetry, the one he used to read aloud to me on stormy nights. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. But today felt like the kind of day that asked for memory, not mourning. I zipped the bag slowly, breathing in the quiet. There was no rush. The plane wasn't until evening. A cruise, yes, but not the one I had once planned as a peace offering to people who never saw the weight behind the gesture. This one was different. It was a retreat. For women like me, older, wiser, maybe a little bruised. The itinerary didn't boast about water slides or bingo nights. It spoke of sunrise journaling, meditation on balconies, storytelling circles, and something called bone-deep laughter. I didn't know what that last one meant. But I was ready to find out. Martha picked me up just after noon. She was wearing that same wide-brimmed hat she wore to brunches. the one that always tilted too far to the left but made her look like a rich aunt in a Nancy Meyers film. "You look light," she said, opening the trunk for my suitcase. "I feel it," I replied. And I did. Not because everything had healed, but because I had stopped bleeding for people who never noticed the wound in the first place. The drive to the airport was full of comfortable silence. The kind only old friends understand. She didn't ask if I'd heard from Ben. I didn't offer. We both knew some absences speak louder than apologies. At the gate, she hugged me longer than usual. "Take everything in," she whispered. I nodded. "And leave nothing behind." The flight was smooth. The descent was even smoother. As we touched down, I looked out the window at the glittering coastline and felt no pang of what could have been. I wasn't thinking about empty staterooms or family group chats I was no longer in. I was thinking about the women I was about to meet. Women who knew how it felt to pour and pour until they forgot the shape of their own cup. Women who once thought their names would always be spoken at dinner tables, only to realize they'd become a whisper, or worse, a chore. At the port I stood in line with them. Some had silver hair tied in soft scarves. Some had eyes that hinted at long-held secrets. Some laughed too loudly in that wonderful way that said, "No one's watching me anymore and I don't care." We boarded together. No one rushed ahead. No one tried to impress. We were all just arriving. My cabin was modest but perfect. A small balcony, a chaise lounge, a tea kettle humming on a low shelf. I opened the sliding door and let the sea breeze rush in. Then I sat. And for a long time I said nothing. I just breathed. It was the kind of stillness I hadn't known I was starving for. And then, as if the universe wanted to test my peace, my phone buzzed. One notification. From Ben. Just one line. "Mom, we didn't mean to hurt you. Can we talk?" I stared at it. My thumb hovered. And for a split second the old reflex kicked in. The one that begged me to smooth things over, to say yes, to grab the rope before it was too late. But then I thought about the last few months. The silence I had lived through. The freedom I had found. The nights I fell asleep without waiting for a call that never came. The mornings I woke up without apology in my mouth. I looked back at the sea. The water stretched endlessly, unbothered by the small drama of my phone screen. Then I placed the phone down on the side table face down. I poured myself a cup of tea from the tiny kettle. I opened the journal and began to write. Day 1, I am here. Fully. Finally. And I smiled. Not because it was easy, but because it was earned. You see, this was never about punishment. It was about pause. About stepping back far enough to see where I had been erased pixel by pixel, and deciding that I deserved to be drawn again, with bold lines, full color, and a name no one could delete. And the most beautiful part? I wasn't alone. That night, under a full moon and string lights on the deck, a group of us sat in a circle. Someone passed a small candle. Whoever held it spoke. Some told stories of grandkids who forgot them. Husbands who left. Friendships that faded with time. Others said nothing, just let their eyes say what their lips couldn't. When it was my turn, I held the candle for a long time. Then I said, I used to think silence kept me safe. But now I know, it only kept me small. They nodded. Some cried. One woman whispered, me too. And just like that, I felt less alone. Not because someone finally said sorry, but because I finally said something to myself that I could believe. I matter. Not because I'm needed. Not because I give. Not because I say yes. But because I'm here. Still standing. Still whole. Still me. If you're still here, still listening, then maybe you felt it too. That quiet unraveling. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that seeps in, slow, polite, invisible. One year you're the center of every birthday, every holiday, every decision. Then one day you're just convenient. Then eventually not even that. You're the ride. The wallet. The babysitter. The one who picks up the slack but never the phone. You go from being asked for advice to being told what the plans are. They don't call it betrayal, no. They call it boundaries. They call it new traditions. They call it just how things are now. And because we've spent our lives loving them more than we've loved ourselves, we nod. We smile. We go along. Until one day something snaps. Not with a bang, but with a text. You won't be joining us. 7 words. That's all it took. And suddenly, decades of giving, of folding yourself into 1,000 shapes just to fit into their world, come flooding back. And you wonder, Was I ever really part of it? I can't tell you what to do when that moment comes. I can't tell you to fight or freeze the funds or write a letter. But I can tell you this. You are not invisible. Not to me. Not to the woman sitting alone at that cafe with her wedding ring still on. Not to the grandmother who used to host holidays but now spends them watching Facebook posts from afar. Not to the mother whose son stopped calling the moment she stopped saying yes. You are not alone in this. You were not crazy. You were not too much. You were not asking for too much. You were giving everything. And they got used to it. That's not your failure. That's their blindness. But now is yours. Your pause. Your breath. Your name spoken by your own voice for once. It doesn't have to look like a cruise. It might be a walk in the park. A solo lunch where you order dessert first. A letter you write and never send. A box of memories you open not to cry over, but to reclaim. It might be the simple act of saying no, and letting that no stand. Or it might be this moment right now, where you listen, feel seen, and whisper to yourself, I'm done being erased. That is where it begins. Not the rage, not the revenge, but the remembering of who you were before the giving made you forget, of what it means to take up space again without apology. If this story reached something deep inside you, it's because it came from a real place. Not a perfect one, not a polished one, but a place carved by love, bruised by betrayal, and still capable of joy. I don't know where your story goes next, but I know this. You don't have to wait for their permission to begin again. You can board your own ship. Write your own chapter. Pack a suitcase with nothing but self-respect and leave the rest behind. If they call, let them. If they apologize, listen, but don't lose yourself in the forgiveness. Because the real healing? It starts when you no longer need the call to validate what you already know. That your story didn't end when they walked away. It began. And if you need someone to remind you, you found her. Right here. Welcome to the rest of your life.